Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this third module in our technology toolkit. I'm Jonathan Turner, and I lead technology strategy and innovation here at Fulfil Finance. And today we're really privileged to be joined by the National Cybersecurity Centre, NCSC, which is part of GCHQ. You can never have too many acronyms when you work in technology. And they're going to take us through the core content. Before we start, I thought it'd be a good idea to set out this module in the context of the series of modules that we've been launching under the brand of the Technology Toolkit over the past 6 months. So on the run up to Christmas last year, we ran a survey across community finance organisations to better understand how they use technology in their day-to-day business. And out of the survey, we had 3 key findings. And those findings have really directed the work that we've been doing in technology at Fair for All, and they've driven the content of the technology toolkit. And the 3 findings were, first one was that the sector is highly dependent on legacy technologies. And these are technologies that have been built on technologies for over the past 2 decades. And in itself, that isn't an issue. But on top of that, we've had feedback from the users of that software that not all suppliers are keeping up with the evolution and innovations that are available to them in technology, and that raises a flag from a cybersecurity perspective. The second observation or finding is that organisations are spending a relatively small amount on their technology. Actually, not even a relatively small amount, it is a small amount. 50% of those that we surveyed spent less than £50,000 per annum, which for a financial services organisation, and in most cases, financial services organisation that's moving to become more digital and engaging with consumers through mobile or through the web, is really very low. And it's a real challenge to run a stable, safe, secure platform on such a low budget. And then the third finding was that the IT capability within the organisations is low. And that's really not meant to be coming across as a criticism, not at all. It's simply the fact that the lenders are typically small organisations and they just have very few people. So over 50% of those that we surveyed reported not having a technologist on their team. So for us to help address the capability challenge at a low cost and to provide some options for their technology platforms, we've set about launching the Technology Toolkit. And to date, we've run a session called Technology 101, and that was intended to bring everyone up to the same level of understanding and appreciation of technology in the context of community finance. The second focused on digital strategy. You need one, and that was accompanied by an ebook to help organisations to develop their strategies. And then this one is the third, and we felt that this is really important to bring up front as one of the earlier modules. There's been a lot of publicity, there continues to be a lot of publicity about major cyber attacks around the world, such as WannaCry back in 2017, which famously impacted the NHS, or most recently in the US, the Colonial Pipeline attack. And we talk about those as major global issues, but the more that we talk to community finance providers, the more that we learn that you too have been targeted by cyber criminals, and in some cases have been victims of successful attacks. And as a financial services organisation, you're very much in the spotlight of cyber criminals. And you might well be seen as a softer target than mainstream finance, who spend millions or hundreds of millions on their cybersecurity. And this module is intended for an audience of board members and introduces you to the free to use and really excellent NCSC Board Toolkit. So today, Victoria will introduce the NCSC, Chris will take us through the threat landscape for small, medium-sized enterprises. And Hannah will introduce the Board Toolkit and how you can use it in your organisations. And then this time next week, we're going to be running a session for the executive management of your organisations, and it introduces some tools that can be used on the ground within the community finance providers. So please do encourage your CEOs, COOs, heads of IT to join the session. So that's it from me until Q&A. So there will be a Q&A running throughout the session. Please post any questions that you have, clicking on the Q&A function on your screen. And this session is going to be recorded, and so will be made available to you and your peers after the event. But now I'm going to pass over to Victoria.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Hopefully you can see my screen. Can I check that you can see the presentation? Perfect. Yes. So yeah, thank you very much for having us here today and allowing us to speak. I'm kicking off just explaining a little bit of background about who the National Cybersecurity Centre are, a little bit about what we do and our capability, and a little bit about us in the team that you've got here today talking to you and what we have on offer for you. So in terms of background, we were set up in October 2016. With our national ambition being to make the UK the safest place to live and do business online. So the UK needed a coherent lead authority that could bring together lots of previous separate parts of government, so we could be that one-stop shop for cybersecurity. In terms of what we do, there's lots of different strands. The first one you can see up on the screen there is all about understanding. So how do we understand cybersecurity and then distill that knowledge into practical guidance? So how do we protect those things we care about the most? The second is the reduce strand. So this is where myself, Chris and Hannah sit within the Economy and Society team. And we're there to really help reduce the risk to the UK by working with public sector organisations, private sector organisations to help improve your cybersecurity. So that means improving the cybersecurity health of organisations, making the internet safer and easier to use, and just making it a lot better for them in terms of their resilience and a bit more prepared if you were to experience a cyber incident. And then one of our bread and butter really of the NCSC is our response to cyber incidents. So we look to respond to cybersecurity incidents to actually reduce the harm that they can cause to the UK. So when a cybersecurity incident does happen, we are there to help the victim and help manage that cyber incident. So like Jonathan mentioned at the start, we're very heavily involved in WannaCry that affected the NHS back in 2017. And I'll touch on incidents a little bit in a moment, but we do deal with a lot of incidents each year. And then finally up there is our nurture strand. And this is really, really important. So this is how we look to nurture and grow our national cybersecurity capability. So whether it's our Cyber First programme, where we look to nurture young talent by basically helping to develop the UK's next generation of cyber professionals. In terms of really helping you to understand what we do day to day, I would really encourage you to go and look at our annual review. So this particular most up-to-date annual review runs from September 2019 to August 2020. And a couple of things to note on this is that between this period, the NCSC actually dealt with 723 incidents, with around 200 of those specifically being related to the coronavirus. So one thing that we really noticed in terms of having to step up over the last 16 months was that cyber criminals really were looking to exploit public fear over the pandemic with particular coronavirus related online scams. So one thing that the NCSC set up alongside the City of London Police was our suspicious email reporting service. It went live last year, and it's something that's been really popular. And what it is, it enables people, whether it be businesses, members of the public, to forward suspected phishing emails to our suspicious email reporting service inbox. And then what happens is the NCSC, we will analyse the suspect email and any websites that are linked to it. We'll use any other additional information that you provided to look for and monitor suspicious activity. And then if we find any suspicious activity that we believe to be malicious, we'll seek to block the address the email came from so it can no longer send emails. We'll work with hosting companies to remove links to malicious websites. And then we will raise awareness of those commonly reported suspicious emails and methods used. And obviously we know that within the financial sector, phishing emails can be really quite troublesome. So this is a really great new service that we've stepped up in the last 12 months. And then the other thing that really is highlighted a lot in this annual review, and it's not something I'll go into much detail about because Chris will cover it when he's speaking, but it really does show the growing threat from ransomware is revealed in this review. It discloses that the NCSC handled more than 3 times as many ransomware incidents compared to the year before. And one thing that we've noticed alongside the rise in ransomware, there's also been a marked shift in the way criminals actually carry out these attacks. And we've seen that they've increasingly been threatening to leak sensitive information publicly until a payment is received. And off the back of this, we've actually updated our ransomware guidance to reflect the changing nature and also emphasise our commitment to ensuring that we're going to help businesses with this growing threat. So I did mention a little bit about the team that we're in. So Hannah, Chris and I are in the Economy and Society team. As I said, this sits in the reduced strand. So we're really conscious. Obviously, cybersecurity is important because people now are using smartphones, computers. It's just a fundamental part of modern life. And a lot of us would find it really difficult now to imagine how we'd function without them. So the ENS team, the Economy and Society team, we cover a range of communities from academia and education, what Chris and I work on specifically small and medium-sized businesses. We look to help charities in the voluntary sector and also large UK businesses as well. And our role really is to raise the resilience and maturity of these priority sectors. We look to make things simple, so we produce cybersecurity guidance that's easy to follow, it's accessible, it's affordable. All our products are free, but we understand there may be a cost in terms of time or a small amount of money for you to actually implement some technical controls. We're also really keen on knowledge sharing, so we use NCSC Insight to help others and increase people's awareness of the cyber threat, and then build partnerships with industry in order to put that messaging out. And the final thing I just wanted to touch on, in terms of all the cybersecurity advices out there, our role as the National Technical Authority is to provide the lead on practical guidance and advice for the sectors that we serve. So we've got a website that I would encourage you to go and take a look at. This is full of practical advice and guidance. It's got advice on mitigations for current threats. There's weekly summaries on threat reporting and lots of products and guidance, in which you can see a few of them up there on the screen now. The one that we're going to dive into a bit more today with Hannah is our Board Toolkit, and she'll explain why that's an important piece of guidance for you all. So now I'd like to hand over to my colleague Chris, who's going to talk to you a little bit about the threat landscape.
Excellent, Vic. Thank you for that introduction, and good afternoon to everybody attending, and thank you for taking the time out to attend this webinar this afternoon. My name's Chris. I work with Vic and Hannah as part of the business engagement team. And really, I just want to spend the next 15 minutes to walk through some of the threat landscapes we're seeing and some of the ways in which you can keep our business safe just by implementing simple controls. Can I just get a nod that we can see the screen? Excellent, thank you. So I think before we start to unpack the threats we're seeing at a national level, we first need to understand what do we mean by cybersecurity and that cybersecurity capability. I've worked with many businesses in the past, and too often cybersecurity is seen as primarily an IT issue. That if you are the victim of a cyber attack, it's for the IT department to sort out and for them to respond and recover from. I think while that is true to a degree, that we are very dependent on the technology and the IT infrastructure we have, we need to understand that your business's cyber resilience capability is a combination of not just the technology, but the people and processes you have in place as well. First and foremost, having the correct training in place for your staff and make sure they have a correct awareness and understanding of the threats and being able to identify suspicious activity to your organization. And also having the correct processes in place as well, the processes we have for backing up our data, making sure that we are updating our devices and software, on the processes we may have when we are faced with a cyber incident. What is our processes for responding and recovering from a cyber attack? And all of this forms that cyber resiliency, that ability to cope with unforeseen incidents, both malicious and accidental. And this is how we define a cyber incident at the NCSC, is that unauthorized access or attempted access to our organization's IT systems. Now, the reason I mention this is because there's two factors there, that a cyber incident can be both malicious, that is the phishing emails, ransomware, denial of service, but we can also face accidental incidents as well. So if the office or the equipment is damaged or lost or stolen, as we've seen there, incidents such as fire, flood and theft. Our organisations need a way in which we can respond to both these incidents, not just malicious but accidental as well. So the policies we have in place for being able to continue our daily operations in the event of a cyber incident, so whether that's a loss of device or hit by a cyber attack. And the threat we're seeing as well isn't just from one source. I think we need to understand that the threat actors we are now facing isn't simply just the cliche teenager in his bed with a hood up. This really just forms one form of threat actor. We have threat actors ranging from cyber criminals all the way up to our nation states, insiders, hacktivists and terrorists, all of which will have their own methods, tactics and procedures for targeting your business. And as it says there, any system can be broken given enough time and motivation and means. That with enough resource and time, a cyber criminal, a threat actor can access our networks, our infrastructure and cause huge financial harm, which is why it's our collective job to make sure that our cyber landscape, our cybersecurity is as strong and resilient as possible to make it as a hostile environment for threat actors. And the way in which a threat actor is able to gain access to our systems, our networks, our infrastructure is by leveraging vulnerabilities within our organization, our systems. Now, Jonathan spoke about this at the beginning about many organizations now run on legacy devices, legacy equipment, which again poses its own vulnerability. Because a threat actor will leverage that vulnerability to cause huge impact to the organization. So some of the examples of vulnerabilities we often see across businesses is the lack of security patches, no firewalls, out-of-date software, or simply as bad passwords. So your job within your organization is to make sure that you're identifying the vulnerabilities and making sure that you're treating the vulnerabilities to reduce that level of impact and lessen the likelihood of that threat. And the cyber attacks we're seeing as well are vastly growing, and the sophistication we're seeing year on year is growing from threat actors. Now, these are some of the more common cyber attacks we're seeing, which came out of the Cyber Breaches Survey earlier this year. And some of these, many of us will be familiar with, everything from phishing, ransomware, hacking and viruses. But a lot of these really come down to staff vigilance and make sure that staff are aware of the risk the cyber attacks face the organization. And I'll talk more, I'll explain a bit more in a minute. But as it says there, the vast majority of breaches are ones that come via staff members' user accounts. Basically, cyber attacks occur because a suspicious email comes to an individual or an end user. And by clicking on that link or clicking on that attachment, we see the cyber attack unfolding. So staff awareness and staff training is is absolutely vital when it comes to protecting your cyber landscape and your network's infrastructure. And the Cyber Breaches Survey really plays this out as well. 83% of all cyber attacks on UK businesses were a result of phishing attacks. Now, these are suspicious emails which are coming in to the end user where they're clicking on those links which cause irrevocable harm to the organisation. And cyber criminals will use this entry point to cause further damage, such as ransomware, which is very prevalent at the moment, whereby the malware will encrypt the IT, your networks, your files, your database, in return for a ransom to be paid for those files, those assets to be decrypted. But phishing methods come in all shapes and sizes. Now, first and foremost, we have the generic phishing email. This is where the threat actor is sending out as many emails as possible en masse in the hope that a small percentage of those people will click on this. Now, many of us will receive these emails before. These are emails reported to be from HMRC, Amazon, PayPal, in the hope of us clicking on that link and providing sensitive information or even making a payment. But then we move into spear phishing and even whaling methods of suspicious emails. And these are more focused, more targeted attacks on particular individuals within an organization. Spear phishing is when a threat actor will leverage some information about a colleague or about the organization to create an email which looks very genuine. And I think that's the issue that we often face when it comes to phishing attacks, that we all like to think that we can spot a suspicious email or a malicious item, a malicious attachment. But when we start to see these emails being created for a particular user, especially when we look at whaling, which is aimed at the exec board, the CEO, the CFO, huge cyber attacks have occurred because the chief financial officer has authorized payment, or the director of the organization has clicked on the link they shouldn't have done, purely because that email looks genuine and seems to come from a genuine source. Which, again, it is important that cyber awareness training happens at all levels of an organization, not just the end users, but also the directors and the exec boards of an organization. Because if we can prevent phishing emails from impacting the organization, we stand a much better chance of preventing a serious cyber attack to your business. So here's a quick case study. I know it's text heavy, but I'll walk through it. This was a local county council a few years back. A end user, an individual, clicked on a malicious attachment within an email, and this was around 9:30. And straight away, we started to see increased activity on the network, which led to several files and databases to be encrypted, where a ransom was demanded to be paid. And it says there the impact faced was that over 300 users were impacted and over near enough 50,000 files were encrypted by the time the organisation was shut down. So this really just emphasises the speed in which a cyber attack occurs. And just by having one individual click on a malicious email, malicious attachment, how that can impact the wider organisation. But luckily in this scenario, the damage was limited by having the appropriate business continuity plans and containment actions, and staff were still able to work with pens, paper, telephones whilst those business continuity plans were activated. But my question to people on the call this afternoon is, just consider if your organisation was hit by a cyber attack tomorrow, realistically, how long could you operate before your business started to be severely impacted? Because we know cyber attacks will last days, weeks, even potentially months into years. So just consider how you may be able to operate if your network and your infrastructure was impacted by a cyber attack. And again, these are some of the impacts we're seeing, which was reported in the cyber breaches survey. The business impact of a cyber incident can be huge everywhere, anything from the temporary loss of access to files or networks, straight down to loss of money, loss of access to third-party systems, or even potentially damage to physical devices or equipment. And we begin to quite quickly see the financial impact a cyber incident can have on your organization. The average annual cost of a cyber breach is just shy of £8,500. Now, this is really quite shocking, given that in the last survey, the average annual cost was only about £3,500. So in the 12-month period, we've seen the average annual cost of a cyber attack go up by near enough £5,000. And this is a huge sum of money for our small organisations, especially for medium-sized enterprises as well, because they simply cannot recover that sort of money. And in fact, the longevity it takes to recover from a cyber attack can be absolutely huge. But we need to understand what that incurs. What is the financial breakdown of a cyber attack? Now, a recent study by Ipsos Mori broke this down into 4 quadrants. We have, first and foremost, our short-term and direct costs, which is those we would identify straight away. It's that potential cyber ransom, it's the financial theft and staff response time. But we also have the long-term and indirect costs as well. This is the reputational damage, the supply chain attrition, and that loss of the new and existing customers. These are the things that are very difficult to put a financial price tag on. And we see many organisations never fully recover from that long-term and indirect costs. They never quite recover from that reputational damage, or really build back that loss of new and existing customers. So when you're considering the impacts, the risk to your organisation of a cyber attack, really think of this in these terms: the short-term and direct costs, but also the indirect and long-term costs. The cost it takes to not only to respond, but that long time to recover from that cyber attack as well. So the last thing I want to touch on then, before I pass on to my colleague Hannah, is how do we manage the risk of a cyber attack? How do we better prepare ourselves from the impacts of a cyber incident? And this is where a risk management model is really effective in, again, being able to identify those vulnerabilities that I spoke previously. But then how do we treat those, and how do we make sure that we are managing that risk and building our security profile in the best way possible? And there are 4 approaches to the treatment of that risk, that vulnerability. We can either accept the risk, that is, we can tolerate it, identify the risk isn't significant enough to warrant further action. But we also may need to modify some of that behaviour, modify the risk, make sure that we're treating the vulnerabilities that we're seeing. And it may be that the risk is so large is that we're unable to treat or tolerate it. And this is where we start to transfer that risk to a third party. And this is where we start seeing the importance of insurance and the importance of potentially having a cyber insurance policy. Make sure you have the correct support and financial assistance in place should you be the victim of a cyber attack. And it may be that the risk we're seeing to the organisation is too great that we completely avoid it, and we terminate that risk to prevent further action taking place. So these are some of the considerations we need to look at. We need to consider what are the larger business impacts of a cyber attack. What is that financial hit to the organisation, and how do we manage these vulnerabilities and the risks to the organisation of a cyber attack? That's all from me at this point. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Hannah, who's now going to go into further detail about the Board Toolkit for businesses, which looks at the questions you need to be asking when it comes to your cybersecurity posture. So over to you, Hannah.
Thanks, Chris, and hopefully you can hear me and see my slide. I can't see my slide, so I don't know if it's up yet, but somebody could give me an indication. Is it not up yet? No, okay.
Not quite. We're just in the process of.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
I think
Chris, if you could stop sharing, that would be great. Thanks. That's it. That's it.
Okay. So just to check, you've now got my slide. Is that correct, everybody? Yeah, brilliant. Sorry, just check. No matter how much practice, this bit never quite works, does it? Okay, so yeah, after that introduction to cybersecurity, what it is, how it's affecting businesses from Vic and Chris, I'm going to talk specifically around the cybersecurity responsibility to boards, and then, as Vic said, go on to talk a little bit more about this particular product we've produced, the cybersecurity toolkit for boards. So first of all, it's worth rehearsing really why cybersecurity is a board level responsibility, as I think this sometimes gets missed a little bit. The first thing to say is, as you've heard from what others have said, having sorry, have we got, is there an issue there? Sorry. No, oh, I'm so sorry. I heard a noise. I thought somebody had come in. Right, okay. Yeah. With cybersecurity, we know that actually having network systems, I'm sorry, it's Chris, you're not on mute. I think I've got some feedback from you. Thank you. That's better. Great. Okay. So many organisations, practically all organisations, depend on digital services to function. And so ensuring that those digital services are working properly is absolutely crucial to that organisation itself functioning. In that way, we're really keen to point out that cybersecurity is not a nice to have, it's not sort of extra, but it's absolutely fundamental to how an organisation works. It enables your organisation to do whatever it is your organisation does. So it's absolutely core part of risk management. So obviously nearly all organisations depend on digital technology to function. And as we've seen from some of the information we've had, the potential cost of remedying a cyber incident really can be very significant. Now, there's different aspects to that. There's the cost, the immediate cost of actually resolving that, but there can be fines from the ICO, there can be longer term recovery costs. So it really can be quite dramatic. And then linked to that, of course, is that risk of reputational damage. So for all these reasons, cybersecurity is a core strategic concern for any organisation. So we know that one thing that can hold non-technical people back from getting engaged in conversations about cybersecurity is this feeling that as a topic is a little bit overwhelming. And when I introduce the cybersecurity toolkit in a minute, I'll explain something about the background of it, but just say that these myths I'm about to talk through very much came from research we did with board members, and in particular quite senior board members. So those are quite interesting to reflect on. So the first one we hear quite a lot is the idea that cybersecurity is just too complex for people to understand. Now, we're very keen to say that actually that's not the case. We're not asking any board member to become a technical expert overnight, or indeed at any stage. We're asking them to get to grips with the basics, to understand the fundamental principles that underpin a lot of discussion about cybersecurity, because that's what you need to then be able to have the conversations you need as a board to make well-founded decisions. Then we also hear people say that cyber attacks themselves are just so sophisticated that there's nothing much that can be done to stop them. Now, obviously, that's a rather defeatist attitude, and maybe glad to know it's also not accurate. Now, what we find is that there are some cyber attacks that really are very highly sophisticated and use all sorts of technologies and techniques that only a very small number of people are really going to understand in depth. But that is not the majority of incidents and attacks that most organisations are going to encounter. And actually, quite a lot of cyber hygiene behaviours and quite basic provisions and mitigations can make a real difference to any company's chance of falling victim to a cyber attack, or if they are, how quickly they can get it back up and running again. So there are definitely things that can be done, like relatively simple and often low cost measures that can really help an organisation's cyber resilience. And the third factor we hear a lot is people assuming that all cyber attacks are highly targeted and that their particular organisation won't be perceived as being interesting enough or have information that is valuable enough to attackers to make them target that organisation. Now, that's simply not the case. Any organisation has sensitive personal data that has value to an attacker. That might be selling on that personal data on the dark web, for example. But it's also the case that many organisations don't want that personal data to be released because of the reputational damage, and in that sense they may be tempted to pay a ransom if that data is stolen. So all these three facts together come to explain why cybersecurity is something that all board members need to be engaging with, and they shouldn't be put off from doing so. So I'm just going to give a really brief example of the TalkTalk breach that happened. That was 2016, actually. It was quite well known at the time. It's quite an interesting one. So in brief, what happened was there was a vulnerability on TalkTalk's external website, which meant that attackers were actually able to get into the underlying database that was stored, if you like, behind the website. And from that, they accessed a lot of customer data. You can see some of the key figures there about what an impact that had, that over 100,000 people, subscribers leaving, the losses that quarter, the trading impact, the exceptional costs, and then perhaps most interestingly, well, maybe most interestingly for us in a way, is the fine they got from the ICO at the time. Now, that was actually the largest fine the ICO had levied. And part of why they came to that fine wasn't just so much the amount of data that was stolen, but how that had come to be. And part of the reason for levying such a high fine was the realisation that that vulnerability in the website had been there for some time, and it was something that TalkTalk could and should have recognised and resolved themselves. So there's a really interesting quote from the report when they actually issued this fine. So today's record fine acts as a warning to others that cybersecurity is not an IT issue, it's a boardroom issue. Companies must be diligent and vigilant. They must do this not only because they have a duty to under law, but because they have a duty to their customers. And that was really quite a strong statement, and it sort of changed, I think it sort of indicated the changing tone, the changing understanding of why cybersecurity is so crucial. It's also worth me pointing out at this stage that GDPR regulations make it clear that information security in terms of cybersecurity is very much a collective responsibility as well. It's not something that can or should be delegated to one particular member of staff. So Chris mentioned briefly the survey done by the Department of Digital, Culture, Media and Sport each year, where they look at cyber breaches. I've actually pulled out a few figures myself, which say something about the way boards are tackling cybersecurity. Now, I think this is quite interesting. So this one's about what priority organisations attach to cybersecurity. You see, 80% of businesses overall said they attached a very high or fairly high priority to cybersecurity. So we know we're getting there. Not so surprisingly, charities are slightly behind the curve in understanding the importance of cybersecurity, but I think those figures pretty much speak for themselves. And the other thing that companies are asked is what sort of percentage of boards have one board member with a specific cybersecurity brief? Now you'll see what variation there is across different sectors and different sizes of organisation. It's no surprise, I hope, no surprise that financial and insurance organisations tend to have the highest proportion of companies that do have somebody with that cybersecurity brief. But I will just emphasise what I said previously, is that it is important that the company understands and the board understands that cybersecurity is a collective responsibility, even if one person has the brief. So this brings me to the toolkit itself, this bit of guidance that we produced as NCSC, and it's available on our website. So broadly what happened was, as part of NCSC starting up, as part of thinking about what the UK economy needed, was research showing that board members, and this was specifically FTSE 350 board members, were clearly very talented, very experienced in being able to manage and discuss and interrogate all sorts of important strategic issues, many of them around risk. But cybersecurity was often an area that they just didn't have that specific knowledge base for. And so the Cybersecurity Toolkit for Boards is very much in response to that. It's about trying to give board members that stepping stone they need to be able to start looking at this area. So it was designed primarily for corporate boards and the large corporate boards, but the messages are pretty much relevant to any kind of board, whether that's charity trustees, school governors and so on. And the toolkit itself, the guidance, it's a long document. I think it's about 10,000 words. It's available on our website and it can also be downloaded. And it's very much a sort of reference library of quality assured material. And I'll show you how it's presented in a moment. So that's the basics of the toolkit and why we produced it. And its aims, really, just to pull this together from other things I said, is this idea of enabling board members to get just a little bit technical. Now, that was a quote from our then CEO when the toolkit was launched. This idea that no board member needs to become a technical expert, but all of them need to get to grips with the basics, and we can help them do that. And then part of that then becomes about supporting board members once they've got that level of knowledge to find out and think about what those sorts of questions they need to be asking their technical experts are, the questions they need to ask so they can really be getting the assurance that they need to understand where their company is in its cybersecurity journey, where the vulnerabilities are and what might need addressing. And so part of that and asking the right questions is part of a broader aim to encourage some really crucial conversations between the board and its technical experts to try to get those people, if you like, talking the same sort of language and being able to question each other, being able to query if they don't understand answers. So that's the purpose of the toolkit. So the structure, as I said, it's a pretty long document. It's really is best thought of as a sort of modular toolkit, really. It's a modular reference library. So it starts with an introduction to toolkits, so to cybersecurity, and then we've got 9 core modules. Each module looks at one particular cybersecurity area. And then at the end, we've got the appendices and reference material. This diagram shows what these 9 modules are, how the information is organised. Now, part of it being modular is that we're really keen to make the point that nobody needs to work through it from cover to cover. You don't need to go from 1 to 9. In fact, we actively encourage organisations to think about which of these areas are their priority and focus on those first. So the first 3 of these are embedding cybersecurity into organisation objectives, so looking at strategy really, and growing cybersecurity expertise, and then looking at cybersecurity culture. Now those 3 can be seen as a sort of nice to haves because they're perhaps not quite as operational or as easy to put into practice as some of the others, but they are so much more than nice to haves. If those 3 fundamental areas aren't looked at and considered within an organisation, it's very difficult to actually build effective cybersecurity within an organisation. So that's the modules. Now within each module, basically there's some information about what that theme is, be that having an incident management plan, about why it's important to organisations, why it's important that the board understands it. And then what brings it all together, what makes it actionable, is at the end of each of these 9 modules, we then have a series of suggested questions. These are questions that we suggest board members ask, and then the questions are followed by the sorts of things that might come up in the answers. What it's trying to get at is, what does good cybersecurity in this area look like? Now, of course, there's never an easy answer to that, but it's some hints of what sort of things you might expect to hear or what sort of issues you might want to discuss. So the questions themselves, we've sort of then subdivided, so 9 modules, each one has questions at the end. And then the questions are for one of 3 different audiences, each question. So some questions are for actual individual board members themselves. So that might be something about understanding their own personal responsibility. And then the next set of questions are the ones for the board as a whole. The board thinking about the strategic issues, about how they're organising themselves, how their governance is structured. And the largest number of questions are actually questions that we think board members might well be wanting to ask technical experts to get assurance. So this is going to be about more operational issues that we can't expect and shouldn't expect board members to be getting into the details of, but we know that they will need oversight of to ensure how well their company is doing in addressing these concerns. So just to put this into practice, along with the toolkit itself and all the guidance, we've also on the website got a document which is just the questions and answers from the toolkit. And I'll put the links in the Q&A a little later, but this is just to show you exactly what I mean. So this is just a screen grab from the 9th module, the final module, which is planning your response to cyber incidents. We've got 4 questions shown here. Question 1 is a question for board members themselves. Then above question 2, you can see that's a question for the board. And 3 and 4 are questions for the organisation. So this is very much to try to separate out what's a strategic question that board needs to be considering, and what are those questions about assurance and oversight. So that's the toolkit itself. I know often people find it most useful to get some sense of, well, what do we actually do with it? Where do we go with it here? So I've just got a few examples to run through, and then we'll throw it open for questions and answers. So something we know several boards have done is look at those 9 modules and consider the 1 or 2, or in some cases 3, that they feel are most urgent to be addressed by their board, and then looked at them in real depth on an away day with the technical experts there, perhaps with a report written in advance and talking through options and going from there. Another interesting way we've had the toolkit use has been very much actually driven and championed by technical leads themselves. So we've had Chief Information Security Officers use the toolkit to then write some kind of report to the board saying, right, this particular framework has been provided by NCC. This is where I see us stacking up against these modules. This is my advice of where we go next. So it really can be looked at it like that. Then we've had, I mean, this may be quite pertinent to today, but we've had particular modules of the toolkit looked at by sector-wide groups. So this might be companies that are actually commercial competitors, but have come together to share expertise, good practice and ideas for cybersecurity, because this understanding that cybersecurity challenges in the sector are a weakness for everyone. We've actually got far more to gain for collaborating on cybersecurity solutions. And then, interestingly, we've had internal auditors look at the particular questions in the toolkit and select some of them that they will use themselves as part of their auditing process. And then finally, I think for organisations that are perhaps more action-oriented, there's a particular blog that we produced about the time the toolkit was launched that was very much about the practical ways cybersecurity can be impacting an organisation. 5 questions were pulled out there, and it was things like, what are we doing about phishing? What are we doing about user control? So if that's a way to get cybersecurity on the agenda for the first time, then absolutely we'd be happy for people to go with that. So that's how the toolkit's being used. I'm just going to show you very briefly how it looks on our website at the moment. We've, in the last week or so, gone for a slightly more interactive model on the website. The URL is there. So it's a hub in the sense that the guidance is there, the guidance itself, these 9 modules, but we've also got some supporting resources. So we've got some audio and video you can see there. We've got some presentations. You can actually, some sort of fairly introductory level presentations to toolkit, cybersecurity, that you can watch on YouTube, or indeed slide packs if this is something you wanted to look at as an organisation. So that sort of those notes are already there. We've also got some really interesting little podcasts with people within the industry talking about particular modules of the toolkit and how they have applied those within their sector. And particularly pertinent today, it's been mentioned several times already, ransomware. What we're going to, this is the first of what will be a series of what we're calling spotlight topics, again within the Toolkit Hub, where we're going to look at particularly pertinent questions that boards need to look at and look at what the issue is and what boards need to be doing about it. So just a couple of weeks ago, we had something published particularly on ransomware, what board members need to know and what they need to be talking to their technical experts about. Now, ransomware does come up in part throughout the toolkit, but as we were hearing, ransomware has become, the development of it has been quite significant over the last 12 months or so, and there is a particular angle on some questions that you'll be wanting to ask, so we've really tried to focus on that. That is a whistle-stop tour of what the toolkit is, how we hope it can help, and the resources we've got around that. And there's a lot of information to take in. The best way to get to grips with it is to have a look around that website and see what works for you. And at this point, I think I'm going to hand back to Jonathan, who is going to compare the Q&A.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Hannah. And thank you also to Chris and Victoria for your presentations. And the toolkit really is a very practical, orderly way of working through what's important and gives you as the board some structure to really tackle your cybersecurity responsibilities. Really encourage you to pick it up as a board. We have got some questions coming through. Please do continue to send through as many any questions that you have for me or for the team. We'll just run through them sequentially. The first, it's a comment rather than a question. Agree to lack of security technology, but even the IT industry lack of security knowledge. I think there's been a little bit of work done on this. Victoria, is this something you'd like to pick up on? Yeah,
I won't comment specifically on the IT industry in terms of their knowledge, because obviously that's varied across the board. But I suppose specifically, obviously, we work with the IT industry to try and help and support them as much as we can. But in terms of if you're a small or medium-sized business and you outsource your IT and you've got a relationship with them, it is quite widely known that a lot of organisations don't really know what they're getting from their IT service provider, and if security is part of that. So I think one piece of guidance which I would point you to is one that we wrote during the start of the pandemic last year, which is called Moving from Physical to Digital, about relying more on digital technology to run your business. And there's a section in it about talking to your IT service providers. So it's about improving that relationship and bringing up the topic of security, understanding your service level agreement, talking to them directly about security issues. So ask them what they're doing about patching and updates, talk to them about backup arrangements, understand what access you have. So is your data and the data of others which you have responsibility for, is that being properly protected? Talk to them about logging. Obviously that can play quite a vital role in diagnosing any problems your systems are facing. So talk to them about logging, talk to them about instant response. So, okay, they might help you with your IT services, but what will happen if things go wrong? And I suppose service providers should operate on the presumption that they will be attacked. So it should be clear how and when they will engage with you during a security incident. So it's all about really starting those discussions and understanding what they can do for you, and maybe prompting them to look at ways they can support you as well from a security perspective, and not just day-to-day running of your IT.
Thanks very much, Victoria. That was great. So the next question is one that I will pick up, which is, if £50,000 per annum on technology is too little, how much is enough? It's a really good question, but one I'm afraid comes with the answer that starts off with "it depends." So first of all, £50,000 per annum is not necessarily too little. It is just a very tight budget to run a financial services organisation on. There are suppliers in the market who have got some very cost-effective solutions that enable organisations to run at those very low that very low cost base. But just looking at the survey that we ran before Christmas, we were seeing the credit unions and CDFIs who were operating as a fintech, effectively, where technology was really at the core of their offering. We were seeing them spending in the region of £500,000 to £1 million per annum on their technology, which is, I'm not suggesting for a moment that every organisation ought to be spending that kind of money on their tech.
I'm going to unmute. Has anybody else lost Jonathan?
Yeah, I can't hear him either.
Yes, sorry about that. Yes, we seem to have lost Jonathan, so we'll just give him 30 seconds to see if he can rejoin.
Just in the meantime, while he's rejoining, just to fill the silence, I've just seen another question that I could answer while we've got a gap. So I've seen that someone's asked, does using cyber accreditations like Cyber Essentials Plus, ISO 27001 on websites, letterheads, etc., increase or decrease the likelihood of cyber attacks? So in terms of answering the question a little bit differently, why should you look at getting something like Cyber Essentials and why people might want to use it on websites and letterheads, is that using that badge, once you've attained that accreditation, can obviously reassure customers that you're working to secure your IT against cyber attacks. It could potentially help you attract new business with the promise that you have cybersecurity measures in place. And I suppose in more general, it gives you a clear picture of your organisation's cybersecurity level. And quite common reason for people to get Cyber Essentials is that some government contracts actually require Cyber Essentials certification. So in terms of using that badge, which people obviously want to use the badge on websites and letterheads once they have the accreditation, there's no research to say either way that it increases or decreases the likelihood of a cyber attack. Obviously, if you're a cyber criminal and someone's got that badge, you can see that they're taking cybersecurity seriously because they've obtained it. But in terms of people with Cyber Essentials accreditation across Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus, our statistics and research have shown that there's very few or none that have reported experience of cyber attacks since having Cyber Essentials. So I don't think using the badge on letterheads or on your website particularly would increase or decrease. I think if it's something that's right for you, Cyber Essentials accreditation, then we would encourage you to look at obtaining the certificate. And if you're not sure, if you're a small business and you're not sure whether you want to take that step, because obviously there's a cost attached to it, then we would encourage you to look at the Cyber Essentials Readiness Toolkit. So it's like a questionnaire, and your responses to the questions help create a personal action plan to help you move towards meeting the Cyber Essentials requirements. And the action plan includes links to specific guidance on how you can actually do that. So I'd encourage you to take a look at IASME, who's the accreditation provider's website, for more information on Cyber Essentials. Any luck with?
Thank you. Hi there. I think Jonathan's still struggling to get on, so you'll have a poor substitute in me, but I'll try and pick up some of the Q&A questions for you. I think probably the one I wanted to come to next was an interesting one. So it's over the last few months, we've seen quite a few businesses paying the ransom to retrieve their business operations, which in turn incentivizes more ransomware attacks. So the question really is around, how do you advise businesses to deal with them? I think, Hannah, can I come to you on that one, please?
Yes, certainly. Thank you. Yeah, it's a very pertinent and timely question. And it's one that we've actually addressed directly in the blog I put up there about what board members need to know about ransomware. Now, ultimately, it is any organisation, any company's decision about whether or not they choose to pay a ransom, assuming it is legal to do so. Sometimes there may be issues around particular wherever you're funding, depending on funding agreements. Sometimes there is some reason that would rule it out, depending on the sector. So the government advice is therefore that each organisation needs to make their own decision. However, there are some considerations we would urge you to take into account. The first is that paying a ransom certainly doesn't guarantee that you will retrieve your data. It becomes basically a trust issue if you pay that. You are trusting people who, after all, are highly skilled cyber criminals to honour that agreement if you pay them to release your data and not hold on to copies of it. And so you can't actually have any guarantee that paying that ransom is going to be successful for you as an organisation right there and then. The other thing we've heard of happening a few times is where a company has paid a ransom but haven't actually fixed the underlying vulnerability in their system. So there have been occasions where an organisation has paid a ransom, their data has largely been returned, and then they have just been hit again straight away. So it's something else to be aware of. And then there's also the issue that, as was mentioned, I think it was by Chris, that we know there is a trend in ransomware now. It's not just so much about encrypting data and making it inaccessible, but often organisations, cyber criminals, will go back with another request for further payment to basically to prevent them from publishing whatever data they've stolen elsewhere. So almost you get hit by a double whammy. So those are the considerations that all board members should bear in mind if they're in a situation where they're trying to decide whether or not to pay a ransom. There's been a lot more talk in government circles and at our Cyber UK, our sort of annual conference earlier this year, the ministers, there's been a lot more talk about concern that if anyone pays a ransom, it's acting, it had the extent to which it is acting as an incentive, if you like, for cyber criminals to try to do a similar thing for organisations in the same sector. And we certainly have concerns that that is the issue. So lots of things to think about there. And we have to leave it to each board to make the decision that they believe is correct for them.
Fab. Thank you, Hannah. I think Jonathan is back, so I'll hand back to him in a moment. I'll just tick us on to the next question to give him a chance to catch up, if that's okay. Okay, so I think that we've got a couple of questions here towards the end. So there's one around commercial IT protection packages, and are they good for protection in this area? And perhaps a sort of on top of that question too, how are giants like Microsoft viewed by NSCS? So if I could come to one of you guys for that, I think that you could possibly one and the same question there, but if it's two separate ones, then please do let me know.
I can jump in there quite quickly with that one because we can't comment or endorse any specific company, so there's not really anything we can talk about in terms of particular IT organisations, or we can't endorse that people use Microsoft over any other operating systems or technology.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I think the last question we've come through onto there refers to a similar thing, whether there's a list of recommended suppliers. But again, that's not something that you guys can do, I think.
That's correct. We don't. Just really a follow up to what Vic just said there, though, in terms of if there are major vulnerabilities discovered in major pieces of software or kit, that is the sort of thing that we would be publicising in our weekly threat reports that people can sign up to from our website, which is reporting on, it's bringing together various sources, open source reporting. So that is something to just keep your eye on as well.
Fab, thank you. Jonathan, it looks like I can see you here, so hopefully I can pass back to you. I think that's probably most of the questions, but if not, I'll hand back over to you.
Can you hear me, James?
We can, yes, yeah.
Okay.
I'll try and pop it live.
Well, first of all, huge apologies to everyone that that I was cut off in the middle of a question. It's kind of ironic, isn't it, that we're in a technology webinar and the technologist gets cut off. So apologies for that. I was in the middle of answering the question about whether £50,000 was enough or what is enough. And really, there isn't a single answer to it. And what we would do is we would look at an individual organization and we would look at the IT, the digital strategy that you've set out, and be able to make an assessment as to whether the right level of spend was being allocated to technology. But really, you've got to go all the way back to the business strategy, link the business strategy to the digital strategy, and then make some cost assumptions off the back of that. But we can pick up with that separately offline. But once again, apologies for the falling off the call. That has been a really fascinating and massively helpful session for us, and hopefully you as board members will all be able to take away something really valuable there and have access to the board toolkit. And please do get in touch with us, and we can put you in touch with the NCSC if you have any questions at all regarding this session. But for now, thank you very much. Please do encourage your executive team to get involved next week when we'll be running the session for practitioners in cybersecurity. So thank you very much. Have a great day. Bye.